Hello everyone. Welcome to my channel English for All Reasons Good, based on the CBSE guidelines and syllabus. Today we are going to do the poem The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost for class 9. Now first we will read about the poet and his style of writing. Now about the poet Robert Frost, he was born on March 26, 1874 in San Francisco. He was an American poet, well known for his realistic writings of rural life and his use of American informal speech. Now, his style. One of the research papers on Robert Frost remarks Frost's poetry contains plain words but complex thoughts. Now, this is important. Plain words, but the thought behind those words is complex, it is deeper. Frost uses symbols taken from nature to express the intended meanings. So, in this poem, also, there are symbols that are taken from nature. And Frost is optimistic in his attitude of life. So, these are the major points in his style that you should know. Now, before going on to the poem, we need to ponder upon this question. Why is it so difficult to make a choice? What factors influence our choice and what actually should influence our choice? Now, this is a very important question because at your stage in a standard ninth, after a year, you have to make choices about your career. So, here you can see in this figure, a man is in a dilemma. So there are so many choices surrounding the man, and he doesn't know which way to go. So the choices that we have to make, what should influence our choice? That is the important question. Whether friends should decide for us, or our parents should decide for us, or it is our potential and our liking that our choice should be based on that. Now, here you can see what if after making a choice, if after some time we still get confused and we look back and we say, what if I had taken the other choice? So the grass is always greener on the other side. So this we need to remember. So if your choice is based on your liking, if it is based on your potential, then you should move on. So therefore, it is important that before making a choice, you give it a very serious thought. So this comes to the introduction of the poem. So the poem deals with a dilemma that man faces while making a choice. This dilemma does not end with the decision made, as his mind keeps on lurking to seek answers for what would have happened if he had made the other choice. So this is a common human trait. So it is not with one person or two persons, but this is a most common trait among humans. We really think that what we don't have or what others have, that is better. So behind the scene. Now behind the scene here means what inspired the poet to write this poem. So we should know this background, then only we will understand this poem in a better way. So Robert Frost wrote this poem to highlight a trait of and to poke fun at one of his friends, Edward Thomas. So he was also an English Welsh poet who, when out walking with Frost in England, would often regret not having taken a different path. Thomas would sigh over what they might have seen and done. So, this man, he would often tell Frost that if they had taken the other path or a different path, it would have been much better for them. Well, even if it was written to make fun of his friend, the poem is actually philosophical, dealing with choices that we come across in our life. So, even if this poem was an inspiration from the friend, but the theme of this poem is very universal. So, in other words, Frost's friend regretted not taking the road that might have offered the best opportunities, despite it being an unknown one. So the other road was also as unknown as the road that he had opted for, but still his mind was on that road. So Frost liked to tease and goad his friend. So goad here means to harass, to provoke. So he told Thomas that no matter which road you take, you will always sigh and wish that you had taken the another one. So let's begin with the poem. So now with this background, let's understand the poem. So first stanza. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry, I could not travel both. And be one traveller, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. So here you can see in the picture. So there's a diversion here. So it is a fork in the road, a diversion in the yellow wood. Now here yellow wood means, here the meanings are given, a forest with decomposing leaves. It is autumn season. It means the leaves, they are falling and they are decomposing, and that is why they've turned yellow to brownish. So the poet says that once he was walking through the forest and he came across a diversion in the road. So he stood there because he could not travel both the paths. So obviously he was one traveler. So be one traveler, long I stood. So he stood there for a long time thinking which way to go. So he looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. So, standing here, so he looked at both the roads as far as it bent. So, it is bending here, you can see. So, bent here means turning. So, it is turning here, and then the road is not visible anymore because it is now covered with leaves and dense growth here. So, the roads they are not visible after a certain point. So the poet says that I stood there for a long time, looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. So he kept on looking at one road, trying to make his decision. So let's read the explanation. So the poet, while walking through a yellow wood, comes across a diversion. The road in front of him divided into two, and he feels sorry because he could not travel both. Being a single traveler, he had to choose one road out of the two in front of him. The words long I stood show that the poet was in a dilemma and kept on looking at one road as far as he could till it bent, that means it turned, and was not visible any more due to the undergrowth. Now let's move on to the next stanza and see what happened. So, stanza 2. Then took the other, just as fair, and perhaps having the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. So now the poet says that after looking at one road for quite some time, I then took the other, just as fair. So just as fair means as good as the other one, and perhaps having better claim. So he says that I took the other, thinking perhaps means maybe he thought that it had a better claim, better option, or better future prospects. And the poet then gives another reason why he chose that road, because it was grassy and wanted wear. So grassy here means that it was unused, and wanted wear means had not been used. So here it means that the road wanted people to walk on it. It was inviting people to walk on it. So, though as for that passing there had warned them really about the same. So, the poet after a while feels that as far as walking of the people is concerned, both the roads had been worn out equally. So, after spending quite some time at the diversion, thinking which road would be better for him, the poet finally took the other road. He took the second road, which he found to be as fair in opportunities as the first one. He felt that maybe the second road had better future prospects for him because it was grassy and wanted wear. It means that the road was not much traveled by the people and it was inviting people to walk on it. So the poet took the second road. But after walking for some distance, the poet felt that as far as the passing of the people is concerned, both the roads looked equally used. So after working on that option, on that choice, his mind again lurked back to the first road, thinking that the first road was equally looked equally good. So this is because we are not satisfied even after making a choice. We are still confused that whether we had made a correct decision or not. The choice not picked by us also seemed lucrative. So now we move on to the third stanza. And both that morning equally lay. In leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. So the poet now says that that morning when he reached that diversion, he found that both the roads laid equally in front of him. In leaves no step had trodden black. So it means trodden black, undergoing decomposition because of being crushed under feet. So that means they had not been crushed, they were lying fresh and green that morning in front of the poet. And the poet says, oh, I chose the second road because I've kept the first road for another day. But at the same time, he contradicts himself and then says, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. So already the poet knows that once he had made a choice, he can rarely come back and retrace his steps. So, still in dilemma, the poet says that both the roads looked similar that morning. The leaves on both the roads they were uncrushed and fresh. Then, consoling himself, the poet says that he has kept the first road for some other day. But in the very next line, he contradicts himself and says that he knows that one way leads on to another, and he doubted if he could ever come back. So there is no looking back in the road of life. So this stanza tells us about the importance of deciding upon a choice or an option. Because once a decision has been made, it would become very difficult to retrace it. It is very difficult to make a choice, especially when it is a career choice, because no one can predict for sure what will be the consequences. As the poet says in the first stanza, he tried to look at the roads as far as he could. He meant he was looking for some surety, for some clarity about the destination. But this is not possible till you reach there. It is a different experience for everyone. So now we come to fourth stanza and the last stanza. And this stanza is very important. So now the poet says, I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Now here, the sigh word is very important. So the sigh, it means deep breath, and hence here means in the future. So the poet, so you can see at the picture, the poet is in a thinking mode. So he says that he would be telling this after ages and ages. That means when he has become old. So he might be telling his story to someone. So he says that at some point in his life, many, many years after, he would be telling his story to someone with a sigh that he once faced a predicament. Predicament means confusion. He was in a dilemma when he had to choose out of the two choices in front of him, that were two diverging roads in a wood. This choice was a life shaping decision for him. He chose the road less traveled by. He adds that the choice he had made that day has made all the difference in his life. Now, looking back, the poet is wondering what his life would have been if he had taken the first road. The words all the difference are important because whether the difference is positive or negative is not known. Maybe keeping the readers guessing was the intention of the poet, as two people making the same choice may not end with the same result. Now, this is important. We'll move back to the stanza again. So here the poet says, I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Now, this all the difference is important question from the examination point of view also. Now, all the difference does not tell us whether the difference that the poet is talking about is a positive one, whether the poet was successful after making that choice, or the poet was not at all successful. So we don't know. Therefore, the poet is actually wondering. He is just looking back and he is just wondering what his life would have been if he had taken the first road. So he is not at all regretting, he is not at all repenting, and we also do not know that he is saying this in a very happy tone. So, all the difference, we don't know what kind of difference, but we know that he is just looking back and he is wondering, as we've discussed before, that it is a common human trait to think about things that they don't have. So, the poet is wondering what his life would have been if he had taken the first road. So, what he wants to highlight is that it is man's nature to brood over what he doesn't have. People, like his friend, will all the time be discontented with life, but then there are others who are happy with their choices, even if the choice is less traveled by. So, this brings us to the theme of the poem. So, now let's see what is the theme. The importance of decision making. This is a very important theme of the poem. So every decision, it should be made carefully, for it can shape your future in a particular way. We may think that we can go back and change the decision later in life, but sometimes it is not possible. Another theme is looking for assurance in a particular field. So he says that one might have several successful examples in front of him for a popular choice, that is the road most traveled. But then there can be positive examples in case of a less traveled road also, although those examples can be less in number. But further, one will always find failures in both the cases. So there is no graph that can show you for sure that if you will walk on this path, you will always be successful. There are failures in both the cases. So it is normal to wonder what the outcome would have been if the other road or the road not taken was the road chosen. But to contemplate this hypothetical question deeply is folly. So the poet says that if you will keep on thinking on this question, you will be wasting your time. For it is impossible to say whether taking the other road would have been better or worse. All one can say is that it would have been different. So that is what the poet also said, that if you have taken the other road, the results would have been different from what he had after taking the second road. So being adventurous and taking risk is not a bad idea. The poet himself did that and it had shaped his life differently. So poet was also adventurous and he took the risk of walking on the road that was not much traveled, and it had shaped his life differently. Now, very important question from the examination point of view. So I'll be doing this question with you. What do you think the last two lines of the poem mean? So, looking back, does the poet regret his choice or accept it? Or this same question can come in this form also. The poet says, I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So, what is the difference the poet is talking about or the poet is mentioning? So, you will answer this question like this. So, in the last two lines of the poem, the poet says, I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. After making his choice, the poet says that many, many years later, he would tell his story of making a choice of less traveled road, and that has shaped his life in a certain different way. We are not going to tell whether that different way is successful or not. So he takes a deep breath, that is, he sighs and wonders. So that sigh is of wonder. Don't write the sigh of regret. So he takes a deep breath, he sighs, and wonders what his life would have been if he had chosen the first road. So, this is natural with everyone. It is human nature to be curious about things that they don't have. He is wistful to know. Wistful again means he's curious to know if his life would have been any better or different than it is after making that choice. So, this should be your answer for this question. So, this is the poet does not regret his choice. The second part of the question, being adventurous, he didn't want to go with the flow. That is the road traveled. So, though confused, he contemplated. Long I stood. This tells us that the poet stood there for a long time thinking. So, he contemplated before choosing the second road because he knows that one way leads on to another and it is rarely possible to go back and live that moment again. So you will write that the poet did not regret his choice. He was adventurous, he wanted to take the risk, and therefore he chose the less traveled road. And he also knew that once a choice has been made, no one can come back and live that moment again. So, the message and the little devices of this poem I'll be taking up in the next lesson, in the next video, because otherwise, again, it will be very long. So, kindly subscribe to my channel and do let me know if all your doubts they are clear after this explanation. See you in the next lesson. Happy watching. Thank you very much.